In 2015, archaeologists in Galilee, Israel opened clay vessels sealed for 10,000 years. Inside, they found seeds. Not just any seeds, fava bean seeds, still viable after 10,000 years. The people who stored those seeds were among humanity's first farmers. They had no written language, no metal tools, no pottery yet, but they understood something we completely forgot. In a land where survival meant choosing what to plant first, they chose beans before grain. Why? Because these weren't ordinary seeds. They were medicine disguised as food. Each bean contains up to 0.5% L-DOPA. That's the same molecule pharmaceutical companies synthesize today and sell for hundreds of dollars to treat Parkinson's disease, depression, and dopamine deficiency. The compound that makes you feel motivated, alive, clear-minded, and it grew freely in every garden. For 10,000 years, it fed empires. It healed minds when nothing else could. Then, in less than a century, we labeled it poor man's food and let it vanish from our plates. This is the story of the fava bean, the forgotten brain cure we dismissed as ordinary. From Galilee, the fava bean conquered the ancient world. By the Bronze Age, it appeared simultaneously in Spain, Greece, and Switzerland. A global network of healing before ships, before roads, before empire. The ancient Egyptians placed fava beans in tombs as food for the afterlife. The Romans ate them at festivals honoring the dead, believing the beans held power to communicate between worlds. They weren't wrong about the power. They just didn't have the language for neurotransmitters yet. When the mind grew dark, when winter stole color from life, when soldiers marched too long and felt nothing, the bean brought them back. Roman physicians prescribed fava beans for melancholy. Medieval herbalists called them the bean of balance. They knew. They all knew. Across continents, across millennia, human beings recognized that this bean did something to the mind, something healing, something powerful. The science finally caught up in 1913. A biochemist named Marcus Guggenheim isolated L-DOPA from Vicia faba, the fava bean, for the first time. He had no idea he was extracting one of the most powerful molecules in brain chemistry. It wasn't until 1938 that scientists discovered L-DOPA converts directly into dopamine in the human brain. The pharmaceutical industry took immediate note. Within decades, synthetic L-DOPA became the gold standard for treating Parkinson's disease. A multi-billion-dollar industry was born. Patents were filed. Teas were manufactured. Prices were set. But the bean that gave birth to the medicine, forgotten, dismissed, called peasant food. By the 18th century, as Europe grew wealthier, meat and dairy replaced beans on tables. Fava beans became a mark of poverty, not wisdom. In Britain, where fava beans had fed the population for 5,000 years, they disappeared from kitchens almost overnight, relegated to animal feed. Think about that. 5,000 years of cultivation. 5,000 years of knowing this bean supported brain health, gone in a generation because it wasn't fancy enough, because it reminded people of hard times. But fava beans, like all forgotten knowledge, don't vanish. They wait. By the early 2000s, the world faced a crisis of the mind. Depression rates climbed year after year. Parkinson's disease diagnoses doubled. The brain was struggling across entire populations. Doctors wrote prescriptions for dopamine-altering drugs at record rates. SSRI, antidepressants. Synthetic L-DOPA formulations costing $300 or more per month. But patients kept asking, is there another way? Some doctors started remembering, started researching, started looking backward to move forward. In 2005, researchers began testing the forgotten cure against synthetic drugs. They gave Parkinson's patients fresh fava beans, measured their blood, tracked their symptoms. The results were startling. Fresh fava beans raised plasma L-DOPA levels comparable to standard medication doses. But the effect lasted longer. Patients reported prolonged on periods, These are the hours when movement feels fluid, when the mind feels clear, when Parkinson's symptoms recede and life feels almost normal again. The beans worked, not just theoretically, not just in folklore. They actually worked in measurable, clinical ways. Modern neuroscience revealed exactly why. L-DOPA crosses the blood-brain barrier. That's a feat very few molecules can achieve. Your brain is protected by this barrier specifically to keep most substances out. But L-DOPA gets through. Once inside, it converts directly to dopamine, flooding depleted neural pathways with the neurotransmitter the brain desperately needs. And this applies to more than just Parkinson's. Dopamine governs motivation, focus, reward, pleasure, movement. When dopamine drops, depression follows. Motivation dies. Everything feels harder. Recent studies link inflammation in the frontal lobe, a key driver of depression, directly to dopamine deficiency. The brain literally cannot produce the chemicals it needs to feel okay. The bean that fed ancient peoples may be the key to treating modern mental health crises. Not as a replacement for medical care, but as foundational nutrition the brain needs. So why did we stop? If this bean is so powerful, so medicinal, so effective at supporting brain chemistry, why did it disappear? The answer is both simple and devastating. Class prejudice. As societies became wealthier, people wanted to distance themselves from peasant foods, foods associated with poverty, with hard times, with making do. Fava beans fell into that category, not because they weren't nutritious, not because they didn't work, but because eating them reminded people of being poor. So the wealthy stopped eating them, and culture follows wealth. What the rich rejects, everyone else eventually rejects too. Within a generation, the bean that sustained civilizations for 10,000 years was considered fit only for animals. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies synthesized the exact same molecule and sold it for hundreds of dollars per month. They didn't advertise where they got the idea. They just patented the synthetic version and called it medicine. But to reclaim this power, we have to relearn how to grow fava beans. We have to open what I call the lost manual of the fava bean, because this plant operates differently than modern crops. First secret: frost defiance. While modern gardeners wait for warm weather, fava beans demand cold. If your ground isn't frozen solid, meaning above 15 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 10 degrees Celsius, you can plant these now. In winter, push the large seeds 2 inches deep into cold soil. They're winter warriors. While the rest of the garden sleeps, they build massive root systems, ready to explode into growth the moment the sun returns. Second secret: the nitrogen engine. Ancient farmers didn't just plant fava beans for food. They planted them to heal soil. Fava beans are nitrogen fixers. Their roots host bacteria that pull nitrogen from the air and lock it into the earth. They require no fertilizer. They create their own. Every crop you plant after fava beans, whether tomatoes, corn, or squash, will grow bigger and healthier because the bean was there first. Third secret: the pinch. This is a lost technique from old cottage gardens. In late spring, the plant shoots up tall, but it has one enemy: aphids, which love soft top growth. The solution is brilliant. When the first pods set low on the plant, you pinch off the top few inches of growth. This removes the pest target. More importantly, it forces the plant's energy down, away from leaves and into swelling pods. It concentrates the harvest. And when harvest comes, we must unlearn how we've been taught to eat beans. The stigma of peasant food gave us boiled, mushy, gray beans. That's not how you eat fava beans. Harvested young, they're sweet and tender. Culinary historians remind us the ancients didn't boil the life out of them. They roasted them. Fava chips. Roast fresh beans in the oven with olive oil, cumin, and sea salt until golden. High-protein, dopamine-boosting snacks that taste incredible. Green gold. Blanch beans briefly, then blend with garlic, lemon, and fresh herbs. This is bioavailable brain medicine that tastes like something from a restaurant. The younger you harvest, the sweeter they are. Don't wait until they're tough and starchy. Catch them early, when they're still bright green and tender. But ancient wisdom always respects power. Fava beans are not for everyone. There's a genetic condition called G6PD deficiency, common in Mediterranean and African populations, that makes this bean dangerous for some people. For those with this deficiency, eating fava beans triggers favism, a breakdown of red blood cells. This is why Pythagoras famously forbade his followers from eating them. He knew they were powerful enough to heal, but also powerful enough to harm. For people with G6PD deficiency, avoidance is absolute. No fava beans, ever. But for the rest of us, they're a gift. If you have Mediterranean or African ancestry, get tested before eating significant amounts. Today, science is catching up to what the ancients knew. NASA researchers are studying fava beans as a top candidate for Mars missions. They're high-protein, nitrogen-fixing, and potentially a morale booster for astronauts dealing with the psychological challenges of deep space. Think about that. NASA wants to take fava beans to Mars, but we called them peasant food and stopped growing them on Earth. Universities across Europe are identifying bioactive compounds in fava beans that may protect against neurodegeneration. Not just treat symptoms, but actually protect the brain from degenerative diseases. But perhaps the most radical rediscovery is this: the brain was never meant to be fed by factories. For 10,000 years, humans ate foods that naturally supported dopamine production: fava beans, wild greens, organ meats. Fermented foods? The human diet was rich in compounds our brains need to produce neurotransmitters. Then, in a single century, we replaced them with processed foods devoid of the compounds our neurons require. Depression rates exploded. ADHD diagnosis skyrocketed. Brain fog became normal. Parkinson's cases doubled. These aren't just diseases. They're messages. The brain is telling us it's starving for nutrients we stopped providing. And here's where the pharmaceutical angle becomes clear. If people knew that a bean they could grow in their garden contains the same L-DOPA that costs $300 per month in prescription form, would they buy the prescription? Some would. Some need the pharmaceutical precision. But many would try the food first, would plant the bean, would feed their brains naturally. That's not a profitable model for pharmaceutical companies. You can't patent a 10,000-year-old bean. You can't charge $300 per month for something people can grow themselves. So the bean stays forgotten, called peasant food, dismissed as old-fashioned, while the synthesized version gets marketed as breakthrough medicine. The barrier isn't agricultural, it's cultural. We've been trained to see medicine as something that comes from pharmacies, not gardens. We've been taught that peasant foods are inferior, that healing requires expensive interventions. But our ancestors knew better. They knew the bean that fed the body also healed the mind. They didn't need double-blind studies to observe that people who ate fava beans regularly had better mental clarity, more motivation, more resilience. They just knew. And they passed that knowledge down for 10,000 years until we decided we were too sophisticated for peasant wisdom. The bean that clothed Bronze Age kings, that fed Roman soldiers, that sustained medieval peasants through famine, never stopped offering its gifts. It simply waited for us to remember. In clay vessels sealed for 10,000 years, the seeds remained viable, waiting, ready to grow the moment someone gave them soil and water. That's the nature of true knowledge. It doesn't die. It waits. Marcus Guggenheim isolated L-DOPA from fava beans in 1913. Pharmaceutical companies turned it into a billion-dollar industry, but they didn't invent anything. They just synthesized what the bean had been offering freely for millennia. The 2005 studies proved fava beans raise L-DOPA levels as effectively as medications. Patients reported longer on periods, better symptom control. And they were eating food, not pills. NASA wants to take fava beans to Mars because they fix nitrogen, produce protein, and support mental health in extreme conditions. Yet on Earth, we feed them to animals and call them peasant food. The erasure was cultural, not scientific. We stopped eating them because they reminded us of poverty, because they weren't fancy, because we wanted to prove we'd moved beyond such simple foods. But the brain doesn't care about class. It needs dopamine. And for 10,000 years, humans gave it dopamine through food. Then we stopped and wondered why depression rates climbed. The answer is growing in gardens, waiting in ancient seed banks, stored in clay vessels for 10 millennia, still viable, still ready. The brain food we buried is ready to return, not as a luxury, not as medicine, but as what it always was, food that heals. If this story made you question what else we've forgotten, what other ancient wisdom we dismissed as primitive, share this video. More people need to know what's been buried. Subscribe for more investigations into foods that were suppressed not because they don't work, but because they work too well without generating profit. The next forgotten cure is already waiting in the archive. The brain was never meant to run on processed food and pharmaceuticals alone. It was meant to be fed by gardens. Fava beans are still here, still producing L-DOPA, still offering the same brain support they gave our ancestors for 10,000 years. Called peasant food, dismissed, forgotten. But seeds don't forget, and neither should we.